My daughter-in-law's family looked down on me my whole life. They never said it out loud, but I could see it in the way they held their wine glasses when I walked into a room. On the night of their 25th anniversary party, I stopped on the highway to help a little girl having a seizure in the back seat of a wrecked car. I showed up to the resort 2 hours late, with blood on my shirt and gravel in my shoes. They had security walk me out the front door. Then the girl's mother came through that same door 15 minutes later, and what she said to my son's in-laws is something I'll be telling my grandchildren about until the day I die. Before I get into it, do me a favor and hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments what state you're watching from. I want to know who's listening. The phone rang at 6 minutes past 8 on a Tuesday morning, which was unusual because my son Bradley never called before 9. He had this superstition about not bothering people during their first cup of coffee. Something his mother had drilled into him when he was 8 years old. My Helen had been gone 4 years that May, but a lot of her habits were still walking around inside our boy. I picked up on the second ring. The kitchen in my little ranch house in Brunswick, Georgia, smelled like burnt toast because I'd gotten distracted reading about the Braves. I never could time the toaster right after Helen passed. She used to stand there and watch it like a hawk. "Pop," Bradley said, and right away I knew something was off. He only called me Pop when he wanted something he didn't feel good about asking for. "Morning, son. Listen, I know it's last minute, but Whitney's parents are doing the 25th on Saturday, the big one, at Sea Island." I waited. I could hear him breathing on the other end, the way a man breathes when he's trying to figure out how to phrase something that isn't going to come out clean, no matter what he does. "Whitney really wants you there." There it was. Whitney really wants you there. Not Bradley. Not the in-laws. Whitney, my daughter-in-law, who had spent the better part of 9 years trying to bridge a gap her own parents had dug with a backhoe. "Whitney's a sweet girl," I said. "It's at the Cloister. Saturday at 7. Black tie, but Whitney said sport coat is fine for you." Sport coat is fine for you. I let that one sit on the counter next to the burnt toast. My boy didn't mean it the way it sounded. He'd been swallowing his in-laws' particular brand of polite disdain for so long he didn't even taste it anymore. But that didn't change what the words were. "I'll be there, Bradley." "Thanks, Pop. Really." I hung up and stood there a while, looking out the kitchen window at the bird feeder Helen had hung from the dogwood tree 15 years ago. The cardinals were arguing with the squirrels again. They always did. The Cloister at Sea Island. I knew the place by reputation, the way you know a movie star you've never met. Helen and I had driven past the gate one time on a Sunday drive, back when she was still well enough to take Sunday drives. And she'd said, "Well, that's where the people who don't know we exist go to stay." She'd said it without any meanness, just stating a fact, the way she stated most things. Whitney's parents, the Halverson Beauchamps, yes, that was their actual hyphenated name. And yes, Whitney had been smart enough to drop the second half when she married my Bradley, owned a cardiology practice in Savannah that stretched across 3 counties. Carlton Halverson Beauchamp had been on the cover of a regional magazine twice. His wife Felicity ran some kind of charity for purebred horses, which I'd never understood and had stopped trying to understand around the 3rd Christmas dinner. The first time I'd met them, I'd worn the gray suit Helen bought me for our nephew's wedding in 1998. Felicity had touched my lapel like she was checking for a tick and asked me if I'd come straight from the office. I'd said no, ma'am. I'd been retired 6 years, and she'd said, "Oh, what a relief," with no trace of a smile. I'd worked 38 years for the City of Brunswick Water Department. Started as a meter reader and ended up running the whole maintenance side. I knew every pipe under that town the way other men know the streets of their childhood. None of that was the kind of thing that came up at the Halverson Beauchamp Christmas table. Saturday morning, I got up at 6 and put on a pot of coffee. I'd already laid out everything on the guest bed the night before. The navy blazer was the same one I'd worn to Helen's funeral, which felt like a strange thing to wear to a party, but it was the only one that still fit. The slacks were charcoal. The tie was a plain navy silk that Bradley had given me for Father's Day 3 years back. The shoes, I'd polished them on the porch the evening before, listening to a Braves game on the transistor radio Helen had bought me for our 40th. I gave myself plenty of time. Sea Island was about an hour and 20 minutes from my house if I took 17 south and went easy. Whitney had texted me the night before to say the cocktails started at 7 and dinner at 8, and not to be late, and to please not bring a gift because Felicie had specifically requested no gift. I knew what that meant. It meant Felicity didn't want to deal with whatever a man like me might think to bring. So I'd put a card in my breast pocket, with a check inside for $200 made out to Whitney's mother's horse charity. Helen would have approved. She always said the smaller the gift, the more sincere it had to be. I left at 5:30 in the afternoon. The Buick had 198,000 miles on it, but it ran like a sewing machine because I knew how to take care of an engine. The sky was that watered-down Georgia blue you get in late spring, and the marshes along 17 were just starting to go that bright neon green. That means summer's coming, whether you're ready or not. I was about 30 miles south of Brunswick, on a stretch where the road bends through pine flats, and the cell signal goes thin, when I saw the brake lights ahead. A silver SUV was off on the shoulder at a bad angle. Front end down in the grass, one wheel up off the ground. There was glass scattered across the right lane, and a woman was standing in the road waving both arms at the oncoming traffic. But cars were just swerving around her and going on. I watched 3 vehicles do exactly that before I understood that nobody was going to stop. I pulled over about 50 feet past her, threw on my hazards, and got out. She was maybe 40 years old, hair pulled back, no shoes on. She'd been crying so hard she could barely get the words out. "My daughter," she said. "My daughter. Please, my daughter." I went to the SUV. The back passenger door was already open. There was a little girl in the back seat, strapped into one of those booster things, and she was seizing. I'd seen it before because Helen's brother had epilepsy his whole life. The girl's eyes had rolled up, and her little body was going rigid and slack in waves, and there was a thin line of foam at the corner of her mouth. "Did she hit her head?" I asked. I don't know. We were going around the curve, and a deer ran out, and I jerked the wheel, and we went off, and she just started, please, please. I'd called 911 before I even got out of the Buick. I'd done it on instinct. The dispatcher said the nearest ambulance was coming from Darien and would be 10 to 12 minutes. 10 to 12 minutes is a long time when a child is convulsing in a car seat. "What's her name?" I asked the mother. "Caitlin, sweetheart, you're all right. We're right here." I unbuckled her gently, watching the rhythm of the seizure, waiting for a pause. When her body went slack between waves, I lifted her out and laid her on her side in the grass off the shoulder, the way Helen's brother had taught me to do for him 40 years ago. Recovery position. Don't put anything in their mouth. Don't try to hold them down. Just let it run its course and protect their head. I rolled my blazer up under her head as a pillow. The grass was wet from a sprinkler somewhere, and I felt the knees of my charcoal slack soak through. But it didn't enter my mind to care about that until much later. She seized for another minute or so, and then it stopped. Her breathing went deep and ragged. Her color came back slow. I knelt there beside her with one hand on her shoulder, just keeping her on our side, because I knew the next part, the postictal part. She'd be confused and scared when she came around. The mother was on her knees in the grass, holding her own face with both hands, just shaking. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Genevieve. Genevieve Ashworth. Genevieve, look at me. She's coming out of it. She's going to be okay. The ambulance is on the way. Has she had these before?" Genevieve nodded fast, 3 times. She was diagnosed last year. They were supposed to be controlled, the new medication. She broke down again. "It's all right. You're doing fine. Breathe in for me, slow." I sat there with that little girl in the wet grass for about 8 more minutes before I heard the siren. She came around partway during that time, looked up at me with big, confused gray eyes and asked who I was and where her mama was. I told her my name was Russell. That was the first name that came out of my mouth, my dad's name, and that her mama was right there beside her. Genevieve crawled over and put her hands on the little girl's face. When the paramedics pulled up, I stood back and let them work. 2 young guys, sharp and competent. They knew Caitlin's mother was a wreck, So the older one talked to her gentle and clear, while the other one got the girl loaded onto a stretcher. There was a small cut on Caitlin's forehead from where her head had bumped the door frame during the wreck, and that's where the blood on my blazer had come from. I hadn't even noticed it until I picked the jacket up off the grass. "Sir, are you family?" the paramedic asked me. "No, sir." I just stopped. He nodded once, the kind of nod a man gives another man when he doesn't have time to say what he means. "Thank you for stopping." Genevieve grabbed my hand before they put her in the ambulance. Her hand was small and cold and shaking. "What's your name?" "Your real name, please." "Hollis McAllister. I have to go with her. I don't know how to." "You go. Don't worry about anything out here. I'll wait for the tow truck if you want." "Could you?" "Yes, ma'am. You go." She climbed in the back of the ambulance, and they shut the doors, and the siren started up again, and they were gone. I stood there on the shoulder of Highway 17 with blood drying on my blazer, and grass stains on my knees, and somebody's purse in my hand, because Genevieve had dropped it without realizing. I called the tow company the dispatcher had given me, and I waited. The driver took 35 minutes to show up. I helped him hook the SUV. He asked what happened, and I told him, and he whistled low and said, "Well, mister, you're a damn good Samaritan." I gave him my number to pass to the family, and I gave him the purse, and I asked him to make sure they got it. By the time I was back in my Buick, my hands had finally started to shake. That's how it always works. You hold steady when you have to, and then your body sends the bill afterward. It was 8:47 when I pulled up to the gate at the cloister. I'd called Whitney from the road twice and gotten her voicemail both times. I left a message. I told her there had been an accident and a child was hurt, and I was on my way and I was going to be late and I was sorry. The phone reception out there had been bad. I didn't know if the messages had even gone through. The valet at the cloister was a young man in a white jacket. He looked at my Buick the way a chef looks at a roach. He looked at me in my blood-stained navy blazer with the wet grass-stained knees, and his face did a complicated thing. "Sir, are you, checking in? I'm here for the Halverson Beauchamp anniversary party. My son is the son-in-law." He didn't quite know what to do with that. He told me to follow the path to the right, and the event was in the Spanish lounge. He didn't take my keys. I parked my own Buick, which is something I don't think had ever been done at the cloister before. I walked through the lobby. There were people in tuxedos and silk dresses, sitting on velvet furniture, and a string quartet playing somewhere out of sight, and I could feel every single eye in the room go to the blood on my chest. Nobody said anything. They just watched me walk by. The Spanish lounge was easy to find. There were 2 big oak doors propped open, and the murmur of 300 people behind them. I stood outside the doors for a second and tried to brush some of the dry grass off my knees. It didn't come off. I straightened my tie. The tie was clean, at least. I walked in. The room got quiet in waves, not all at once. First, the people closest to the door noticed me, and then the people behind them turned to see what those people were looking at. And then the whole room sort of folded inward toward me like a wave coming back from a seawall. Felicity Halverson Beauchamp was at the head table on a low daze. She was wearing a champagne-colored gown and a diamond necklace that looked like it had been excavated from a mountain. She saw me, and her face did something I'd never seen a human face do before. It went pale, then pink, then a kind of plaster white you can only achieve with very expensive makeup. She stood up. She didn't walk over. She didn't have to. Her husband, Carlton, stood up beside her, still holding his wineglass. Whitney came running toward me from a side table. My Bradley was a step behind her, his face ash gray. "Oh my God, Hollis! What happened? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt. There was an accident on 17. A little girl, Whitten." Felicity's voice cut across the room like a wire. "Whitney, please." Whitney turned. "Mother, he stopped to help." "Whitney, this is my anniversary. Please." Carlton was walking over now. He had that doctor's walk, the one that says I've got bad news and you're going to listen quietly. He took my elbow, actually took my elbow, the way you'd take an old man's elbow at a nursing home. "Mr. McAllister, Hollis, why don't we step outside for a moment?" "Carlton, There was a child. I'm sure there was. Let's step outside. He walked me out of the Spanish lounge with his hand on my elbow. Bradley followed us. Whitney followed Bradley. Felicity stayed at the head table because she wasn't going to leave her own anniversary, but I could feel her eyes on the back of my blazer the whole way out. In the hallway, Carlton finally let go of me. Hollis, look, I appreciate that you've had an eventful evening. But you understand the situation. This is a formal occasion. There are 300 guests here. Senator Brackman is here. The mayor of Savannah is here. You can't be in there like this. There was a child seizing an wrecked car. I understand. I'm a physician, Hollis. I understand about emergencies, but the emergency is over now. And you have blood on your jacket. You have blood on your shirt. You're tracking grass on the carpet. What do you want me to do, Carlton? He didn't answer right away. He looked at Bradley. Bradley wouldn't look at him. I think, Carlton said carefully, the kindest thing for everyone would be if you went home and got cleaned up, and we did a family dinner with you next weekend. Just family. Somewhere casual. My treat. Dad, Bradley said. Dad, it's all right, son. No, it isn't, Whitney said. She was crying. Dad, it isn't all right, Daddy. And she was looking at Carlton when she said it. Daddy, this man stopped to help a child. Look at him. Whitney, lower your voice. I will not lower my voice. A man in a black suit appeared at the end of the hallway. He had an earpiece. It was security for the resort. The kind of polite, broad-shouldered security they keep at places like the Cloister, so that the guests never have to see the rough part of the world. He walked up to us and said, very quietly, sir, we've had a complaint. Would you mind coming with me? The complaint was from Felicity, her own daughter's father-in-law. I didn't argue. I didn't even look at Bradley, because I didn't want him to have to carry that look around. I told the security man that I would walk myself out, and he nodded and walked behind me anyway, 6 feet back, all the way through the lobby and out the front doors. The string quartet was still playing. I sat down on a low marble bench in the front courtyard by the fountain. I was going to wait there a few minutes before I drove home, because my hands were shaking again, and I didn't trust myself behind the wheel just yet. The night air was warm and smelled like jasmine and salt. That's when the second ambulance pulled up. Not a real ambulance. A black Suburban with tinted windows. It came up the long drive at a steady pace and stopped right in front of the entrance, and a driver got out and opened the back door, and Genevieve Ashworth stepped out. She had changed clothes. She was in a dark blue dress and flat shoes, and her hair was still damp. Her face was set the way faces get when somebody has decided something on the inside and is on their way to deliver it on the outside. She didn't see me at first. She was scanning the building. Genevieve. She turned. She came over fast and grabbed my hands. Caitlin's stable. They're keeping her overnight at Memorial in Savannah, but she's going to be all right. The neurologist said you put her on her side, that's why she's all right. Thank God. My husband is with her. I came as soon as I could. I had to come. She was still holding my hands. Hollis, what happened to you? Why are you out here? The man at the desk said the Halverson Beauchamp party. I was late. They preferred I wait outside. She looked at me, then she looked at the bloodstain on my blazer, which was her daughter's blood. Then she looked back at the doors of the cloister. Come with me. Genevieve, no, listen, it's all right. I don't want to make a scene. Hollis, come with me. I have learned in my life that when a mother whose child has just survived a seizure tells you to come with her, you come with her. I stood up. She took my arm. We walked back through the lobby together. The same people in the velvet chairs watched us go by in the other direction. The same security man saw us coming and started toward us, and Genevieve looked at him just once, and he stopped where he was. She walked me right back into the Spanish lounge. Felicity was on her feet before we crossed the threshold. She had been mid-toast. The champagne flute was still in her hand. Excuse me, this is a private... Felicity Halverson Beauchamp, Genevieve said. Her voice carried. She didn't raise it. She just spoke from the diaphragm, the way people do when they're used to courtrooms or boardrooms or operating theaters. I apologize for interrupting your anniversary. Felicity's face was doing the white-pink thing again. I'm sorry, do I? Genevieve Ashworth, we've corresponded. You wrote to me 3 months ago about underwriting the new pediatric cardiac wing at Memorial. Carlton, who had been seated again, slowly stood up. Mrs. Ashworth, he said, and his voice had gone careful and slow. Yes, course. I had no idea you'd be. I wasn't supposed to be. My family and I were driving down to St. Simon's for the weekend. We had an accident on 17. My daughter has epilepsy. She had a seizure in the back seat after the crash. Nobody stopped. 27 cars passed us, I counted. The room had gone perfectly silent. 300 people. Senator Brackman. The mayor of Savannah. The string quartet had stopped playing somewhere in the middle of all this, and I hadn't even noticed. 27 cars, Genevieve said again. And then this man stopped. She put her hand on my arm. He held my daughter through her seizure. He put her in the recovery position. He waited with her in the grass until the paramedics came. He stayed with our wrecked vehicle until the tow truck arrived. He missed your party because he was saving my daughter's life. Felicity opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Mrs. Ashworth, we had no idea. That's the part I keep hearing tonight. Genevieve looked around the room. The desk clerk told me a man in a blood-stained jacket had been escorted out by security. He told me the family had complained. He told me the gentleman had been asked to leave because his appearance was distressing the guests. Mrs. Ashworth, please, if you'll allow me to. I'd like to speak, if you don't mind. It's your anniversary, after all, and I'm going to be brief. Carlton sat down. I have never in my life seen a man sit down faster. I have spent 22 years investing in healthcare infrastructure in the Southeast. My foundation has put $140 million into hospitals between Charleston and Jacksonville. I was prepared, this coming Monday, to sign a letter of intent to fund the Halverson Beauchamp Pediatric Cardiac Wing and Memorial. $9 million. I had the paperwork in my briefcase tonight. I was going to drop it off at your office on the way back to Atlanta. I felt Bradley take a step closer to me on my other side. I didn't look at him. I won't be doing that now. Felicity made a small sound, like a door hinge. I want to be clear about why. It's not because of what happened to me tonight. I'm fine. My daughter is going to be fine. It is not because anyone here was inconvenienced by anything I'm doing. It's because of what I just learned about how the people whose name was going on that wing treat human beings when they think nobody important is watching. She let that sit there. Nobody breathed. My foundation only funds people whose character we trust. Hospitals are not buildings. They are the people who run them, the people who work in them, the people who make decisions in them when no one is looking. Tonight, I learned everything I needed to know about the character of the people whose name would have been carved into the lobby of that wing, and I cannot, in good conscience, put that name on a building where my daughter, or anyone else's daughter, might one day be brought in on a stretcher. Carlton was holding onto the edge of the table with both hands, like a man on a small boat. Mrs. Ashworth, please, please. The wing, the children who would be served, will still be served. The wing will still be built. I'll find another lead donor by the end of the month. My foundation will redirect the funds to St. Joseph's instead. They've been asking for years, and we've held off because the location wasn't optimal. The location has just become optimal. She turned to me. Mr. McAllister, I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere that doesn't require a tie. My husband would like to meet you, and so would my daughter when she's well enough. Genevieve, please, let me thank you properly. I looked at Bradley. He was crying, quietly, not making a show of it, just standing there with his hand over his mouth and tears running down. Whitney had her arm around his waist and her face buried in his shoulder. Bradley, I said. He couldn't talk. Son, it's all right. He shook his head. He took his hand away from his mouth, and he said, in a voice I hadn't heard from him since he was 12 years old, Pop, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have walked you back in. I should have... Hush, son. You didn't know. I should have known. Whitney lifted her head. She looked at her mother who was still standing there in the champagne-colored gown with the diamond necklace and the empty mouth. Mom? Felicity didn't answer. Mom, look at me. Felicity looked at her. We're leaving, Whitney said. Bradley and I are leaving. We're going wherever Hollis is going, and I want you to think every day for the rest of your life about what you did tonight, about a man who would have given his coat to a stranger's child, and what you did to him in front of 300 people. Because I'm going to think about it every day. And I don't know yet how I'm going to feel about you when I'm done thinking. She walked over and took my arm. Bradley took the other one. Genevieve walked ahead of us. We went out of that room, the four of us together, and the 300 people watched us go in a silence that felt like the silence inside a church. We had dinner at a diner off 17 called the Pelican's Roost. It had vinyl booths and coffee that had been on the burner too long, and a waitress named Doreen who had been working there since 1979. Genevieve ate a cheeseburger. I had meatloaf. Bradley ordered the chicken fried steak and didn't eat any of it because he was still crying off and on. Whitney held his hand across the table. Genevieve told us about Caitlin, 8 years old, loves horses, wants to be a marine biologist. The seizures had been controlled until 2 months ago, when something in her brain chemistry had shifted, and they were still trying to find the right combination of medications. The accident had not caused the seizure, but had triggered it. She would be in the hospital one more night and then home, and then her father, who Genevieve called Marshall, would take her to her grandmother's in Atlanta for a week so she could rest. I told her about Helen, about the water department, about Bradley's mother, and the way she used to wash the toaster. Around 11:30, Bradley finally spoke up. He looked at me across the meatloaf and said, Pop, I want you to know something. I have been a coward in that house for 9 years. I have let Whitney's family treat you the way they treat you, because I told myself it was easier. It was not easier. It was just easier for me. And I am so sorry. I told him a son doesn't owe his father an apology for being human. I told him the only thing I'd ever wanted was for him to be happy, and that I could see he was happy with Whitney, and that was enough for me. I told him I forgave him for everything he was apologizing for, and a few things he hadn't gotten to yet. He cried again. Whitney cried. Doreen brought us pie on the house. She didn't say why, but I think she'd been listening from the counter. Genevieve drove me home in the Suburban. We left my Buick at the diner, and I picked it up 2 days later. On the ride back to Brunswick, she asked me how I'd known what to do for Caitlin. I told her about Helen's brother Edmund. He'd had his first seizure at our wedding reception of all places, right in the middle of the father of the bride toast. And Helen's father had calmly walked over and laid him on his side on the dance floor and finished the toast from there. I told her Helen used to say the McAllisters and the Henrys could handle anything as long as they had each other to hand it to. Genevieve pulled into my driveway at 2 a.m. She walked me to the door. She said, Hollis, you saved my child's life. Whatever you need for the rest of your life, you call me. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said thank you and good night. I stood on the porch and watched her taillights disappear down Magnolia Street. My porch light caught the bird feeder. The cardinals were all asleep, but I could see the shape of the feeder against the dark, and I thought about Helen. And I thought about how she would have liked that woman, and how she would have liked Caitlin, and how she would have been proud of our boy for finally finding his voice in that dining room. The next morning, Bradley showed up at my front door at 7 a.m. with a box of donuts and a bag of coffee from the place I like. He sat at my kitchen table and we talked for 3 hours. He told me Whitney had not spoken to her mother since we'd walked out. He told me they were thinking of moving. He told me a lot of things he should have told me years ago. Caitlin Ashworth came home from the hospital that Monday. She sent me a card she'd drawn herself. It was a picture of a man with white hair holding a little girl's hand in a field of green crayon grass. And at the top, in big, careful letters, it said, "Thank you, Hollis, you are my hero." I framed it. It's hanging in my kitchen, right next to the window where the cardinals come. Felicity called me about a month later to apologize. I let her say her piece. I told her I appreciated the call and that I held no grudge, because grudges are heavy things, and I was too old to be carrying any extras. She said she understood. We have not spoken since. I don't think we ever will. And that's all right. Whitney and Bradley come down from Savannah every other Sunday now for dinner. Sometimes Genevieve and Caitlin come too. The little girl loves the bird feeder. She sits at the kitchen table with a notebook and writes down every species she sees. She's up to 17. Helen would have loved her. Sometimes you spend your whole life trying to be welcome in a room you were never meant to be in. And then one night, God puts a child in the back seat of a wrecked car on Highway 17 and shows you which room you actually belonged in all along. If the story meant something to you, hit the like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. There's another story waiting for you in the box on the left. Take care of each other out there. You never know which stranger on the side of the road is going to change your life, or whose life you're going to change just by stopping. I've been turning that night over in my head for almost 2 years now, the way a man turns a smooth stone in his pocket while he's thinking. And the older I get, the more I'm convinced that nothing in this life happens the way you expect it to, and most of what we worry about is the wrong thing entirely. I spent 40 years of my marriage worrying that I wasn't enough for my son's eventual in-laws. I worried about the suit. I worried about the car. I worried about whether I'd say the wrong word at the wrong table. And then on one Saturday evening in May, every single one of those worries turned out to be the smallest worry I'd ever held, because the real test of who I was had nothing to do with any of them. The real test was a little girl named Caitlin, seizing in the back seat of a wrecked SUV on a stretch of highway where 27 cars decided not to stop. What I learned that night is that character isn't something you build at a dinner table. You build in private, in small moments, when nobody's grading you. I'd spent 38 years at the water department, learning how to stay calm when a main blew at 3 in the morning. I'd spent decades watching my wife Helen care for her epileptic brother, with patience I never saw waver. None of that was preparation for a country club. All of it was preparation for that little girl in the grass. The hand you've been quietly building your whole life is the one you have to play when the cards finally come down. The other thing I learned is that the people who try hardest to make you feel small are usually the ones with the least under the surface. Felicity didn't have anything I needed. She didn't have anything Bradley needed either, which was the harder truth for him to swallow. We spend so much energy chasing approval from rooms we don't actually want to live in. And then one day a stranger sees you clearly, and you realize you never needed those rooms in the first place. To anyone watching this who's been treated the way I was treated, who's been the relative they're embarrassed by, the parent they put at the children's table, the in-law they tolerate but don't love, I want to tell you something. Don't bend yourself trying to fit. Don't apologize for the work your hands have done. Keep stopping for the strangers on the road. Keep doing the small decent thing when nobody's watching. Because that's the only thing that's actually yours, and one day life is going to ask you to show it, and what you have built quietly in private is exactly what's going to walk through the door beside you. My Bradley got his voice back that night. Whitney found her spine. Caitlin sends me drawings every month. The Cardinals still come to the bird feeder Helen hung, and I'm still right here, in the same little ranch house in Brunswick, exactly where I was always supposed to be.